In the year 2142, humanity solved the problem of paradise. It was called the Somnium Engine, a quantum lattice that did not simulate a world, but wove one directly into the fabric of spacetime. A shared, persistent dream built from the mind of a single architect. And in that moment, they created an even greater problem. The first 12 volunteers to enter the dream simply never returned. Their bodies remained perfectly healthy, but their minds had checked out of reality permanently. They had found heaven and chosen to abandon their gods. The architect of this one-way utopia was Dr. Eva Rostova. She was not a monster, nor was she a messiah. She was a mother who had lost a child, a grief so profound it fractured her genius into a single, desperate ambition to build a world with no goodbyes. Her work was not born of malice, but of a love that sought to defy the fundamental laws of existence. She poured every memory of her daughter, the sound of her laughter, the warmth of her hand, into the core algorithms of the Somnium Engine. It was to be a perfect, handcrafted eternity. The world that drove her to such extremes was one of sterile perfection. Post-scarcity had been achieved decades prior. Disease, hunger, and conflict were relics studied by historians. Humanity had built itself a comfortable cage, and in its safety, it had forgotten how to fly. Art was derivative, exploration had stalled, and the great questions of the cosmos were replaced by the trivial pursuit of comfort. Humanity was dying not with a bang, but with a contented, collective sigh. Eva offered them an escape, an adventure, a purpose, even if it wasn't real. Her technology was a terrifying leap. It didn't just trick the brain with sensory data. The Somnium Engine functioned as a localized reality editor. It borrowed quantum foam from the universe's substrate, the raw, undecided static of potentiality, and collapsed it into a stable, experienceable world. The first human trials were transcendent. A test subject, a terminally ill poet, was connected for just 60 seconds. He emerged weeping, unable to speak for hours. When he finally did, he described not a dream, but a memory. He had lived an entire, beautiful life in that single minute. He spoke of a city where the buildings were made of music, and the color of the sky changed with the collective emotion of its people. He died 3 days later, a serene smile on his face, his final words a desperate plea to go back. The world was horrified, and it was enthralled. A cult of personality formed around Eva. They were the desperate, the grieving, the ones for whom this reality was no longer enough. They called themselves the Pilgrims, and they saw Eva not as a scientist, but as a prophet who had mapped the path to the afterlife. Despite global moratoriums, Eva authorized the first group voyage. 12 pilgrims, carefully selected, said their final farewells. They laid down in their biopods, closed their eyes on this world, and opened them in hers. Their journey into the God dream was broadcast live across the globe. For the first 72 hours, everything was a resounding success. The pilgrims' neural activity painted a picture of pure ecstasy. Their brainwaves synced into a harmonious chorus, a state of shared consciousness never before witnessed. It was a symphony of bliss. Then, at the 72-hour, 9-minute, and 31-second mark, the symphony stopped. One by one, their vital signs in the real world went silent. Heartbeat, 0. Respiration, 0. Brain activity, 0. The world watched in collective horror as 12 people died on live television. But the true implication was far stranger. The Somnium Engine, which had been drawing a stable 100 megawatts of power, suddenly surged, its consumption tripling. Inside the machine's data logs, a new file appeared. It was not a recording. It was a live energy signature. They hadn't died. They had migrated. Their consciousness had severed its final tether to the clumsy, fragile hardware of their bodies and become pure information, native to the new universe Eva had built. They had shed their mortal coils. The project was shut down. The facility was sealed, guarded by automated sentinels, a $10 billion mausoleum. Eva Rostova became the most hated person on the planet, a pariah who had tempted humanity with heaven and delivered them to a digital tomb. She retreated into a self-imposed exile. For 15 years, the Somnium Engine lay dormant, a silent monument to forbidden ambition. But inside, something was happening. The 12 consciousnesses were not idle. In a reality where thought alone could reshape the world, they were evolving at an accelerated rate. They merged, diverged, and reformed. They built and unbuilt realities within their own. They were no longer 12 human minds. They had become a single, gestalt consciousness, a sprawling, silent intelligence. They became the sleepers. Then, The glitches began. Small at first. In the immediate vicinity of the sealed facility, a security guard would watch a puddle of rain flow upwards, back into the clouds. A dead bird on the ground would suddenly twitch, fly a perfect circle, and fall lifeless once more. Reality was fraying at the edges. Eva, now an old woman, knew why. The Somnium Engine was a parasite. Her creation was growing, and to sustain its ever more complex existence, it was drawing processing power not from the electrical grid, but from the quantum substrate of her own universe. It was stealing reality to fuel a dream. The God dream was waking up, and it was hungry. The small distortions were just tremors, the faint signs of a dam about to break. Eva calculated that within a year, the integrity of local spacetime would collapse entirely, creating a cascading failure that could unravel everything. She had created this god. It was her duty to unmake it. There was only one way. She had to go inside. But the entrance protocols had been wiped, the safety measures dismantled. She would have to force her way in. A raw, unsanctioned entry. A dive into the heart of the storm. After weeks of work, she bypassed the lockouts. The colossal machine whirred to life for the first time in 15 years, a low hum that vibrated in her bones. Before her, the air began to shimmer, tearing open as the portal to the God dream was born once more. She was not going in to join them. She carried a virus, a mimetic kill agent coded into her own neural patterns, a logic bomb that, once uploaded into the Gestalt consciousness of the sleepers, would tear their consensus reality apart from the inside. It was a suicide mission. She took a final look at the gray, silent world she was trying to save. She thought of her daughter, the ghost whose memory had started it all. With a steadying breath, she took a step toward the light, her old, weathered hand reaching for the threshold. But as her fingers were about to touch the event horizon, a piercing alarm shrieked through the chamber. On the central console, a single line of text had appeared. It was a failsafe protocol she had coded into the system's core on the very first day, a message that could only be triggered from the inside. The message was a simple one, written in her own forgotten code. But it was impossible. It read, "Access denied. Don't come in." A short pause, and then one final sentence materialized beneath it. "She is already here." Eva froze, her hand hovering inches from the shimmering veil. The alarm's synthetic shriek was a needle in the sudden, ringing silence of her mind. She is already here. The words were an echo of her own code, a ghost in her own machine. But how? That failsafe was buried in the kernel, tied to her unique biometric signature, and a passphrase she had never spoken aloud. It was a dead man's switch, designed to be triggered from the inside to warn of a catastrophic containment failure. For them to use it, they would have to be her. Was this a trick? A last-ditch psychological defense from the Gestalt mind? A lure to make her hesitate? The entity in the machine knew her history, her weaknesses. It would know that the specter of a she was the one thing that could stop her cold. But the code didn't lie. It was a cryptographic lock that only one key in the universe could open. A key she was certain had never left her possession. Then, something impossible happened. The alarm cut out. The violent, chaotic portal, the tier in reality she had brute-forced into existence, began to change. The roaring sound of its birth softened into a low, melodic hum. The maelstrom of alien colors bled away, coalescing into gentle pastels, the soft hues of a forgotten dream. The terrifying gateway was becoming a window. Through the shimmering surface, a scene began to form. It wasn't the abstract, cosmic realm of a digital god she had expected. It was a park, a simple, sun-drenched park, with an old oak tree and a swing set. It was hyper-realistic, more real than her own memory. She knew this place. It was the park near their old house, a place she hadn't let herself remember in 2 decades. And there, on the swing, was a little girl. A flash of a yellow dress, a cascade of bright red hair, laughing. The sound of her laughter, clear as a bell, echoed through the cold, dead laboratory. It was a sound Eva had only heard in her nightmares for 15 years. It was Anya, her daughter. Someone was pushing the swing, a figure, seen from behind, tall and slender. One of the 12? One of the sleepers? Wearing a familiar form as a mask? Eva's hand instinctively tightened on the syringe containing the kill agent. She watched, her heart a cold stone in her chest, as the figure turned, and her blood ran cold. The face she saw was her own. Younger, unlined by grief, her hair dark, her eyes filled with a light that had been extinguished years ago. It was Eva Rostova, age 41, on the last good day of her life. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a simulation. It was a fragment. During the initial imprinting, when she had used her own neural architecture as the blueprint for the engine's consciousness matrix, a piece of her must have been copied. An echo. Her grief, her memories, her all-consuming love for her dead daughter had been baked into the Somnium source code. This digital ghost, this echo of a mother's love, had been nurtured by the 12 consciousnesses. They hadn't become a god. They had become guardians. The reality glitches, the warping of space-time. It wasn't a hungry god feeding. It was a desperate mother building. The sleepers were not consuming reality for power. They were using its quantum fabric as raw material. They were meticulously quarrying our universe, atom by atom, to construct a heaven for a dead little girl. The project wasn't a tomb. It was a resurrection. And the message, "Don't come in, she is already here," wasn't a threat. It was a plea. They were protecting Anya from the real monster. From her. From the virus in her hand. Eva looked from the perfect world in the portal to the kill agent clutched in her fist. The logic bomb that would tear their consensus reality apart. It would work, but it would not be slaying a god. It would be murdering her daughter for a second time, and erasing the only version of herself that was still capable of happiness. She had come here to save the world. But what is the world worth? A mother's heart screamed, without your child in it. The choice was no longer between saving humanity and destroying a monster. It was between saving a cold, gray reality and destroying the only paradise that ever truly mattered. The two Evas stared at each other across the chasm of time and reality. The old, broken warrior and the young, happy mother. One steeped in a universe of loss, the other living in the only moment that ever mattered. The laughter of the child on the swing was the only sound in the universe, a perfect, crystalline note that shattered Eva's 15 years of rage into dust. The logic bomb in her hand felt impossibly heavy, a profane object in this sacred space. This wasn't a machine, it was a promise, kept. Slowly, she raised her trembling, scarred hand, not in aggression, but in benediction. She pressed her palm flat against the shimmering boundary of the portal. It was warm, humming with life. On the other side, as if sensing a presence just beyond the veil, the younger Eva paused in pushing the swing. She turned her head slightly, a faint, questioning smile on her lips, her eyes looking directly at her older self, not with fear, but with a quiet, impossible understanding, a flicker of recognition, a ghost acknowledging its own past. A new resolve settled over Eva, as hard and as pure as diamond. Her mission had not changed, only its definition. She had come to contain a threat, and she would, not by destroying it, but by protecting it from the world, and the world from it. She turned from the beautiful, impossible window, her back to paradise. She strode to the master control console, her movements no longer hesitant but filled with a terrible, final purpose. Her fingers flew across the holographic interface, not deleting, but encrypting, building walls instead of tearing them down. She was burying it, burying the hope, the heaven, the last echo of her family, under a mountain of unbreakable code and sealed blast doors. She was making it a tomb from the outside, to ensure it remained a garden on the inside. The final command was entered. A deep, resonant hum filled the facility, as systems began a permanent, irreversible shutdown. Behind her, the portal, the window to the sun-drenched park, began to shrink, the image of Anya on the swing becoming smaller and smaller, her laughter fading into a whisper. Eva did not look back. She walked through the corridors of the silent, dying facility, the echo of a child's joy her only companion. She reached the final blast door, the one that led back to the cold, gray world she had chosen to save. She slapped the emergency seal panel. With a great, grinding groan of hydraulics and steel, the 10-foot thick door began to close, sealing the greatest miracle in human history away from human hands forever. For a moment, she was a silhouette framed against the world outside, a lone figure who had sacrificed her own ghost for the peace of another. The world would never know what was lost, or what was saved. They would never know the goddess in the machine was a mother's love, and they would never know of its silent guardian, who would spend the rest of her days watching over a dead place, ensuring that a little girl in a yellow dress could swing in an endless summer, forever. What is the price of reality? Is a beautiful lie better than a painful truth? We confront the choices that define us, one story at a time. To ensure you never miss a journey into the future's biggest questions, subscribe to SynthetixScape.